Calvinism is a belief about how God saves people, entirely by his own power and initiative apart from human effort, cooperation, or merit. It is a monergistic view of salvation, meaning that God alone acts to bring about a person's salvation from beginning to end. It's often explained using the acronym TULIP, which stands for total depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement, irresistible grace, and perseverance of the saints. The TULIP acronym itself is relatively recent. It originated in a 1905 lecture by a Presbyterian minister, Sealand Boyd McAfee, and was later popularized by Loraine Boettner in his 1932 book, The Reformed Doctrine of Predestination. Though the acronym is new, the 5 points go back further, as they are directly connected to the Canons of Dort, a 17th century document produced during a major theological controversy in the Reformed churches of the Netherlands. In the Dutch Reformed tradition, churches had long been united by two key doctrinal documents, the Belgic Confession of 1561 and the Heidelberg Catechism of 1563. These outlined a distinctly Reformed understanding of the Christian faith. Jacobus Arminius, a theologian within that same tradition, had been educated in Geneva under Theodore Beza, John Calvin's successor, served as a pastor in Amsterdam, and a professor of theology at Leiden University. He was never excommunicated or censured, but his teaching generated significant controversy, especially through his debates with fellow professor Franciscus Gomarus. Gomarus accused Arminius of undermining core Reformed theology. After Arminius died in October 1609, his followers drafted a document known as the 5 Articles of Remonstrants less than 9 months later in July 1610. The word remonstrance simply means a formal protest or objection. These 5 articles challenge key aspects of the Reformed doctrine of salvation, particularly the way divine sovereignty and human responsibility were understood. If you're struggling to keep track, a helpful analogy would be Martin Luther's 95 Theses. Luther was a Catholic priest seeking to reform the church from within. Similarly, Arminius remained a Reformed clergyman and professor who sought to refine, not overthrow, the tradition he stood in.
Yeah, I gotta make some changes around here.
But remember, the Remonstrants articles were written after Arminius' death, so he merely inspired them rather than being part of that group. He didn't draft or sign the document himself. While it reflected his theological direction, we can't assume he would have endorsed every detail or how the arguments were framed.
I didn't say that.
These followers, also part of the Dutch Reformed Church, came to be known by 2 terms, Arminians and Remonstrants. Let me explain both terms. Remonstrants refers to those who signed the 1610 5 Articles of Remonstrance, a formal protest against the Reformed understanding of salvation. These were followers of Arminius within the Dutch Reformed Church, and their document outlined 5 key theological disagreements. Arminians, on the other hand, is a broader term. It refers to anyone who shares the theological disagreements Jacobus Arminius had with Reformed theology. The term is used cross-denominationally. You can be a Pentecostal, a Baptist, or part of any number of denominations and be an Arminian. But you couldn't be a Remonstrant, as that term refers to a specific group within the Dutch Church. Another way to put it is all Remonstrants were Arminians, but not all Arminians are Remonstrants. Now that we've clarified those terms, let's return to the heart of the debate, the objections themselves. The Remonstrants wrote the 5 Articles of Objection in 1610, which corresponds to the same 5 issues later summarized in the TULIP acronym. The conflict between the Remonstrants and the Calvinists became so severe that it brought the Netherlands to the brink of civil war.
Could cause another civil war.
To resolve the growing division, a synod was convened in 1618 to respond to the 5 Articles of Remonstrance. The synod was held in Dordrecht, Netherlands, hence the name Synod of Dort. It was a national synod for the Dutch Reformed Church, but included representation from 8 foreign countries, with the furthest being England. The synod lasted 6.5 months, from November 13th, 1618 to May 29th, 1619, having held 154 official sessions. There were about 90 delegates in total, including 13 who represented the Remonstrants' view. However, all 13 Remonstrants delegates were expelled from the Synod in mid-January for refusing to cooperate with the proceedings.
Oh, he's not cooperating.
From that point until the Synod concluded in May, all delegates present were in agreement, and they worked together to produce a formal rebuttal to the Remonstrants' objections. That document became known as the Canons of Dort. The Canons of Dort lay out 5 points of Calvinism, which were later organized under the acronym TULIP in the early 20th century. The Canons of Dort are not a full summary of Reformed doctrine. They are a targeted response to the Remonstrants' objections. For that reason, they stand alongside 2 other key doctrinal documents as part of what are known as the 3 forms of unity, which together bind continental Reformed churches. The Belgic Confession, a full doctrinal confession, the Heidelberg Catechism, a question-and-answer teaching tool, and the Canons of Dort, a response to doctrinal error in the Dutch Church. One serves as a confession of faith, one teaches the faith, and one defends the faith. Following the Synod, over 200 Remonstrants pastors were deposed from ministry in the Dutch Reformed Church. They weren't excommunicated, but they were removed from their positions of authority. Many of them later formed their own denomination known as the Remonstrants Brotherhood, which still exists today, though it is much smaller and has taken on a more liberal theological direction. The term Calvinism refers to the theological teachings associated with the French reformer John Calvin. While Calvin lived in the 1500s and never used the term himself, Calvinism was being used shortly after his death to describe those who followed his views, especially on God's sovereignty and salvation. Calvin himself didn't invent the 5 points. He didn't attend the Synod of Dort, which took place more than 50 years after his death, and he didn't coin the acronym TULIP. What he did do was provide one of the most structured and influential theological systems of the Reformation, particularly in his Institutes of the Christian Religion. Because of the clarity and depth of his work, these doctrines became associated with his name.
I'm too much of a Calvinist. If I don't work every day, I get nervous.
The acronym TULIP was developed much later in the early 20th century as a way to summarize the 5 specific doctrines defended at the Synod of Dort. Over time, TULIP and Calvinism have become nearly synonymous. When people refer to Calvinism today, they are often referring to the doctrines represented by this acronym. Now let's break down what each point in TULIP means. Total depravity means sin has affected man's total being, mind, will, emotions, and desires, rendering him unable to come to God on his own since he does not naturally seek or desire him.
I will not submit to you.
Unconditional election. Before the foundation of the world, God chose specific people, known as the elect, to be saved. This choice wasn't based on anything in them or anything God foresaw they would do. It was rooted solely in God's sovereign will and purpose.
Don't you believe in predestination?
Limited atonement. Christ's death was an atonement for the elect only, not for every individual in the world. The atonement was limited in scope, but fully accomplished salvation for those it was meant to save.
Not for everyone.
Irresistible grace. When God calls his elect to salvation, they do not ultimately resist. He gives them a new heart with new desires so that they freely and sincerely come to him in faith.
God's will be done.
Perseverance of the saints. Those whom God has chosen and regenerated will persevere in faith to the end of their lives. True believers may struggle or stumble, but they will not finally fall away. Those who do abandon the faith were never truly part of the elect.
God will keep me safe.
So how does this all actually look in the life of someone who is saved? Well, from a Calvinist perspective, here's how it unfolds. You didn't begin your life seeking God. Like everyone else, you were born in sin, spiritually dead, unwilling, and unable to come to him on your own. You might have known about God, even believed certain things about him, but your heart didn't truly love him. That's total depravity. But long before you were born, God had already set his love on you. He chose you, not because of anything you had done or would do, but simply out of his own mercy and purpose. That's unconditional election. When Christ died on the cross, he died for you by name. He bore your sin, paid your debt, and secured everything necessary for your salvation. Not just the possibility of it, but the certainty. That's limited atonement. At some point in your life, you heard the gospel. Maybe it was for the first time, maybe the 100th. But this time, something happened. God opened your heart. He gave you eyes to see and ears to hear. You felt the weight of your sin. You saw the beauty of Christ. You didn't work that up in yourself. God did it in you. That's irresistible grace. And when you repented and believed, that faith wasn't the cause of your salvation. It was the evidence that God had already begun the work, and now he will finish it. Though you will struggle and stumble, he will persevere you. He will keep you in the faith until the very end. That's perseverance of the saints. This is the Calvinist view of salvation. Not something we achieve, but something God accomplishes from beginning to end. If you want to study the 5 points of Calvinism in more depth, I recommend the 5 Points of Calvinism, a study guide by Edwin H. Palmer. Palmer was a pastor in the Christian Reformed Church and a teacher of systematic theology at Westminster Theological Seminary. I've got a link to his book in the video description. Thanks so much for watching. If you learned something new, please click like as a way to say thanks. If you want more content like this in your feed, click subscribe directly below me. See you in the next video.